it seems like we have everything backwards in the United States in terms of the most harmful effects that a drug, if you will, can have on the human body, particularly alcohol abuse. And then, of course, there are different degrees of types of opioids that are available. From your perspective, when it comes to cannabis, mushrooms, things of that nature, things that are very recreational, have proven to be relatively harmless, why is it that there is still, even to this day, seemingly a crusade of a war on drugs? Even though most people will admit it is a complete and abject failure, it has been an unbelievable waste of money. It has created the prison industrial complex, which is extremely profitable, especially revisitism. So from your perspective, why do you think that this is still a war that's being fought, which is completely pointless at this point?
Well, for starters, the war on drugs has been extremely successful. As you kind of alluded to, you said it was unsuccessful, but then you described successes, because it's important that people understand that $40-some billion a year every year is why this thing continues. Lots of people make money off of the war on drugs. Law enforcement is an easy one. We know prison officials, that's an easy one. We all know, but we don't think about the reporters who write for the New York Times. In no other area you can write such bullshit and not be challenged and not have evidence to support your perspective. We think about movies, the movie Dope Sick. That was nonsense. That sort of thing. They ask you to suspend reality, and whenever a comedian talks about drugs, mostly what they talk about is bullshit. But yet we suspend our reality and act as if it's real. And so all of these people are benefiting from the war on drugs and our perspective on drugs, because drugs, we have agreed, you raised the point earlier, you're a parent. Parents no longer don't have to parent in this domain because the government says it's bad. Therefore, as a parent, you don't have to deal with it. So all of these people have been complicit in making sure that this thing continues. And until we see it as a success, we're going to continue, because it's the most successful jobs programs in our history in the United States. The war on drugs is.
Yeah. It's really more a war on people. The drugs are doing just fine. Like the drugs are, they're just fine. It's really a war on people.
Well, yeah, drugs won. Yeah,
right. Exactly.
How much of an impact do you think a universal healthcare system would have in the country in terms of pulling the teeth away from big pharma and private insurance?
Yeah, I wish we had universal health care in our country, just so everyone just had basic health care taken care of. I live part-time between New York and Switzerland. And in Switzerland, everyone has health care. And in Switzerland also, they, as part of some drug program, some people who are addicted to heroin get heroin as part of their program. Then the majority of those people have jobs, and they all have homes, and they all have health care. They have, and more importantly, they're happy. And so if we had this basic sort of safety net, healthcare for people, maybe it would enhance the happiness of our society, and we wouldn't be so mean and spiteful towards one another. So I am a proponent of just basic healthcare. In terms of what our pharmaceutical companies do, that's part of capitalism. And so if we take that out of the context of capital, like we want to treat pharmaceutical companies differently than we treat the people who sell Nike, we have to look at the whole system. It's just, if you're going to incentivize people for making money like that, well, you have to make sure you have in place those checks to make sure that people don't overdo it. But that's part of capitalism. And which, by the way, I am not an expert, so I have to be careful.
Right, that's not your field.
I want people to understand that I don't want to be outside of my lane.
No, I appreciate very much what you did, what you said in this book in particular, where you were talking about the importance of taking a stand. And it's like this coming out of a closet situation. So many, many years ago I have now a 22-year-old. And I remember when he was born, and I had a lot of friends that are cannabis users, and everybody's all happy and everything's all good. And then they sort of feel like you either have to lie to your children or quit. And neither of those options were suitable to me. So I actually decided to just tell him this was what I did. And I never stopped using. And that's just worked for me just fine. But it was always like this very closeted, everybody's so like ashamed or whatever. And I'll walk straight down the street smoking a bowl. Like, I don't really care. And that to me is, I know, the epitome of privilege. And I get that. Like, I see, okay, there's not this rash of like middle-aged white women being arrested for cannabis use. So I feel like if I didn't take advantage of it, it's sort of just wasted.
Yeah, but that's a lovely thing. It's like when we talk about like privilege, for example, I don't think we mean privilege in that sense. I think we oftentimes twist this, like you as a white woman walking down the street smoking, you're like, okay, I see that too as a protest. And I think that is civil disobedience. And it's showing up on behalf of other people who can't do it maybe. And that's a really good thing. That's not like, we oftentimes use privilege in this sort of negative way, like you have privilege, I don't. And it's not in that way. You want people to do exactly that. That's why I came out of the closet in this book. I talked about all of my drug use. Of course, the media only focused on the fact that I've used heroin and that sort of thing, because then they were relying on stereotypes of the heroin user to dismiss everything else I had to say. But the real goal is to get out of the closet, because if everyone got out of the closet, then we would see how the typical drug user does not look like that typical drug users that we see in the media, in these movies, with some comedian on stage. That's not the typical drug user. The typical drug user is someone who is responsible. They take care of their family.
Right.
They are community servants. They volunteer in their community. That's the typical drug user.
Yeah, I assure you, my kids are infinitely better off that I am a partaker in cannabis than they would be if I were not. I know that with absolute certainty. So, but I grew up with this. So my parents were 60s people. My dad back in the day before weed was done so well, there used to be seeds. And I used to, my little fingers were able to pick out the seeds for him. So like, I grew up around it. It was never a big deal to me. But yet my parents did have friends that overdosed back in the day. And so there was this sort of scare thing going on about it. But most of it, if I think about it now, was probably avoidable if there had been education and if somebody was able to be like the responsible grown-up.
Can we talk about overdose for a second? Because I think that's an important one. So like when people say someone died from a heroin overdose, dying from a single opioid is rare unless you have one of those extremely potent opioids like a fentanyl analog or something like that. But like someone dying from a heroin overdose, that's rare, only heroin. So people, when we think about people who are dying from overdoses or overdose, typically they've combined an opioid with multiple other sedatives, large doses of other sedatives. And so you want people, particularly inexperienced people, not to combine various sedatives because that would decrease the likelihood of them overdosing. Another sort of concern as it relates to opioids is that there are people who don't know that something like Percocet is a formulation that contains a low dose of opioid, like 5 milligrams of oxycodone and about 500 milligrams of acetaminophen, which is Tylenol. Now, if someone is seeking an opioid high from those types of pills, that means they have to take about 10 or 20 of those pills to really get the opioid high. At that level, you're talking about grams of acetaminophen. And if you do this on consecutive days, you run the risk of injuring or shutting down your liver. And that sort of liver toxicity can actually be fatal. And people just don't know these basic sort of amounts of information that could help keep them safe. Because as we talk about the opioid epidemic, we never provide any information that could actually help people continue to be safe out there in terms of what they're doing.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.